Hi guys, how's it going? My name is Julio. Welcome to my YouTube channel. This video is part of a series of videos about my life experiences and what I've learned that is valuable for me both as an artist and as a human. In this video, I want to talk about my time in Copenhagen, Denmark in 2003. Right after my experience at Berklee College of Music in Boston, pretty randomly, towards the end of 2002, I decided to move to Copenhagen, Denmark. At the time, I used to work with an Italian drummer and music producer, and we both had a studio in Boston on J Street, right next to the MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, right after the campus. And we used to have some crazy people going to the studio recording their music, some customers for their local radio stations, and somehow we had this pretty random decision of moving back to Europe, and of all the countries that there were in Europe, we decided to move to Denmark. Why Denmark? In 2003, there was a very interesting underground scene happening in Copenhagen, both for the visual industry, movies, photography, and so forth, but also for the music industry. In fact, at the time, one of the legendary figures of the Danish music scene was Thomas Troelsen, originally part of the Danish group Superheroes. Thomas had this amazing, and still has this amazing studio called the Delta Lab, where the furniture and part of the elements that made the unique style of the studio were inspired by the same scenography or furniture that you see in Clockwork Orange by Stanley Kubrick. I think the main inspiration was also Joe Colombo, an Italian architect from the 70s and a designer from the 70s, and also a lot of inspiration from 60s and 70s vintage style. Arriving in Copenhagen in 2003, in a period where there was no social media, there was basically internet was, I wouldn't say at the infancy stage, but because you had stuff like Napster, file sharing, I think iTunes was already around, if I'm not wrong. But definitely was a cultural shock. Mostly because even the majority of Danish people were using English as a primary language. Pretty much everything was still in Danish as far as TV, newspapers, in general, street signs were in Danish. But for sure, the interesting thing is that it felt being a pioneer in a stranger land. And Copenhagen, in particular, was one of those places where you could feel at home if you are an artist. And I found this challenge also when I lived in Japan for a while. The fact of being perceived as somebody completely alien, and having music to kind of like being a sort of protection, a shield, a safety shield that will make you feel safe even if you feel completely out of place. It was pretty much a big learning curve for me. When I was in Copenhagen, I did so many different projects, and I've been working in so many different situations, from the most crazy and messed up ones to projects with established artists. And obviously, it was pretty much all the time as a session player. But I had the opportunity of playing at venues like Vega, Stengade, Rust, and also a bunch of other underground venues. The Copenhagen period was a very interesting period for me because it was a transition from being surrounded by musicians 24/7 and being in learning mode for most of the time into first being in survival mode and then trying to get an idea of how to organize my life. And even I worked with several people as in the capacity of artist being managed by somebody else. Still, I felt many times that I had to deal with issues and challenges by myself. So Copenhagen was extremely inspiring in 2003. You had the early Raveonettes, which was this duo, a guy and a girl playing this really interesting mix of indie rock and pulp music. Then you had Junior, Senior, which they were just fresh of their global hit Move Your Feet, which was co-produced and recorded at the Delta Lab studio in Copenhagen by Thomas Troelsen, and also had the opportunity of meeting and collaborating with Alex Puddu from the Puddu Varano duo. They had a very successful song, and then I met with other very interesting artists like Donato Russo, Italian filmmaker, director, and visionary, which later on he worked at the Minerva Films, which was another incredible team of creatives. I think they were in Nørrebro, which was an area in Copenhagen where I actually used to live for a while. And what I've learned from that experience was that the opportunity of feeling part of a scene is one of the best ways to learn about yourself and be encouraged, empowered to find your own voice, which is something that should make you feel alive, especially if you're a creative, because you kind of like spend most of your life trying to figure out who you are, what you do, like not just the practical stuff, but mostly about asking yourself, am I doing the right thing? And then you slowly realize that it's not about doing, but it's about being. And being present and active in such an active and innovative scene, such as the one of Copenhagen 2003. And I was so surprised that still there's not much information online about that period in time. I did write a biography about me in 2003 living in Copenhagen, and at some stage I'm going to release it. Let me know if you want to know more about Copenhagen 2003, because I found myself being a sort of historian trying to put together all the different situations and people that I met during that time, which ended up shaping the identity of the Danish music and art scene for the years to come. So, have the opportunity of witnessing the developing, the growth of an art scene is an amazing opportunity. And nowadays, something like this is still happening, but mostly on a local scale, because the big cities like New York, Tokyo, and LA, they are gravitating towards a completely different direction. And a lot of the artists, a lot of the communities and collectives, they're kind of like disjointed. But at the time, you had to gravitate around certain places, around cafes, around clubs, where you will literally have to meet other artists in order to collaborate with them. There was no shortcut, there was no workaround. It wasn't about being popular online, it wasn't about being viral or sending emails. It was literally about, hey, do you want to collaborate with a filmmaker? Then go to that cafe in Nørrebro or in Vesterbro or in Frederiksberg, or go to that club during that night during the week because they have an open mic and you're gonna meet singer-songwriters. So it still happens nowadays, and I still think that the value that I have received from the Danish music scene of 2003 was that it's impossible to replace being physically present in a scene, Doing gigs is now coming back. We are, as I record these videos, I make this video is 2025, and doing live gigs is somehow like feels like a new thing, at least for bands that they were formed like 2 years ago or 1 year ago. But believe me, going live, met people in person, random conversations are probably the most powerful way of uh, creating long-standing relationships and building great bands. Because in the end, it's all about the way you interact with other fellow artists, other fellow musicians. And it's the same thing for business, it's the same thing for pretty much anything in life. But I feel that nowadays it's a bit harder because there's no scenes, so you can't say if I'm going to that city I'm gonna find that particular type of scene. At the time, Copenhagen had a defined scene. It was like going to Norway, or well, but going to Sweden or to Finland and finding all these small, really tight underground death metal, black metal scenes where you had photographers, tattoo artists, musicians, filmmakers, and they were all super passionate about a certain lifestyle. They were literally living the art. So that situation is so true and unique that, again, if you find it, if maybe it's in your town, maybe it's in somewhere that is not even remotely covered online, that's your secret power. Subscribe to my channel if you want to know more about my experiences from living pretty much around the world and obviously behind the scenes on my own projects. And there's a whole different podcast dedicated to my album, The Willow Doesn't Weep, and also about my experience being a featured Grammy musician, being part of the Recording Academy, and collaborating and working with incredible people and getting inspired. So make sure to follow me, subscribe to my YouTube channels. Obviously, you find me also on Instagram. I don't exist really on Facebook. I'm trying to keep things simple. But YouTube is the place to go if you want to see videos like this and you want to have a conversation with me. Ciao for now.